or evening or whatever we are, and I need my notes here. So let's see. So this evening's talk is stop designing like the world is flat, and basically advocating from moving away from flat PSDs into more in-browser design. It does seem to be one of the hottest topics that we see in Drupal circles today. I mean, I think since DrupalCon Austin, I think it's probably one of the first times I ever heard someone advocating for moving to more in-browser design versus flat PSDs. That from a setting expectations standpoint, and a way to help streamline the front-end development and theming that we all work on every day. This obviously stems from a term coined by Brad Frost earlier about atomic design and these principles. They're not new to the design community, but when Drupal 8 was introduced and the ability to align the twig that was introduced in Drupal 8 to the twig that's available in things like Pattern Lab and KSSNode, it just kind of gives you this unique platform to integrate these tools and kind of streamline that theming layer and break free of that world that you can be trained with, flat PSDs or InDesign documents or whatever your clients are sending over to you. It's, and one of the things that I've noticed over the years of doing this is that, a flat PSD isn't always able to communicate and set expectations for the client. It kind of, every once in a while, these ambiguous design targets, you're obviously spending a lot of time documenting, okay, I want the delay on this to be so many seconds, and I want this, but yet you can see this. If you're doing it in browser, you can actually experience that design. It sets it up for your themer and your developer to be able to hit those design targets with absolutely zero ambiguity. Let's see. And, like I said in the introduction, it's like when we're designing a website, we're actually designing the entire ecosystem of components. Whereas, in that PSD, in your design deliverables, you might have 1 page, 2 pages, or 3 pages, and now you've got to extrapolate that over the entire website. And so, thinking of this website design as an entire ecosystem of components, not just that singular page that you have in your comps. So, for me, this is not as much of a technical discussion because I am more on the designer side. I did at the very end include some of the resources that I use to as go-tos to get a more in-depth and technical integration piece on it. If you want to learn more, I'd love to come back possibly in a couple of months once we finish my first project where we're actually implementing this. And then I'll have more stories for you on how it went and things that I noticed that didn't go so well and things that went really swimmingly. So right now I'm kind of in this idealistic sort of framework and frame mind. We're about halfway through the project. And I've been really psyched about it so far, and it seems to be going really well. The client has received it very well, and as I said, come back in a couple months and we'll see how I feel about it then. So who am I? My name is Caryn Eaton, for those of you who I haven't met. I know you see me every once in a while at the users group things. I am helping out with Texas Camp. And my first time trying to do that. I'm getting more active in the community. You can reach me at things like ET ampersand on Twitter and Drupal.org. I actually spend most of my time in UX design and research. So I kind of run the gamut. I don't ever call myself one of these unicorn people. I can go all the way through to the theming, but I do tend to stay more towards the design area. I do visual and UI, and I can actually implement and something as long as it doesn't get too painful. And then just a little bit about me, Drupal person. It came to it late in life and have done lots of other cool things and have really kind of found my calling. So this is awesome that I'm getting to hang out with you guys today. So on our agenda today is kind of made this really to the point, a little bit about component-driven design. What is it really? What the different tool sets are that are out there right now, kind of the ones that we chose to pursue at this stage. Kind of what the Where I'm seeing that it's changing our workflow a little bit, especially in delivery of stuff to our clients, and what those deliverables kind of look like. So what is component-driven design, and why would I want to use it? Well, you know, components are kind of that generic term that it's kind of like a predefined object that's intended to be used across multiple pages. So, you know, we want it to be reusable. You know, we want to be able to instantiate it into other things and then make variants of it. If there's a difference in function or if there's a difference in appearance, what it, I think, optimally does is it ensures that each one of these components are reliable, you know, regardless of the context that it's used in. So, you know, if a button is always going to look the same for the user across all the different pages, you know, a link's always going to look the same. I know when I'm, you know, trying to manage 5 or 6 pages in the design process for a client, and they say, oh my goodness, now I want this red. And you're going, oh my gosh, I have to go change this on 5 or 6 PSDs. Great, awesome. So that you can just get to the next round of, whatever you call it, next round of, not so much deliverables, but that they sign off on it. Exactly, they sign off and say, hey, yeah, that's exactly what we want. I also like to think of this as kind of Legos. We have these building blocks, and we can make little blocks, and we make bigger blocks, and we can combine the blocks together, and they can be whatever color you need them to be. As I said before, Brad Frost coined this term, you know, quite a while ago that, you know, this kind of describe these relationships here. And another way also to think about it is, of course, that we're identifying these different patterns. So some of the things that I found that I think are benefits, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, is, you know, this idea of reusability and creating this living style guide. Now, of course, you know, the deliverable, we usually have style guides, one of those things, and it comes to you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to do the style guide. Let's do the style guide. But it's living. It's actually what you are now using to create the templates that is being used by Drupal 8. So you're kind of doing it over here in this Pattern Lab or KSSNode, but then you're bringing it back over here to Drupal 8. I think it's really simple to understand layout. You know, when I'm walking the client through and you're saying, okay, well, here's what your headlines look like, and here's what your buttons look like. You know, you can then, you just get this really concise, here's what you're approving. The code is definitely consistent. You know, it's almost extraordinarily granular, where you have your YAML files and your twig files and your either JSON, and it could be JSON if you're using it to feed in your data. And it all lives in one little folder. And of course, you have to remember, you need to go back to that folder if you need to make changes. But you know, if you then decide that, you know, we're not going to go that route, then it's all packaged up in that one area. And once again, that no focus on pixel perfect designs. Now, I am a designer at heart. Of course, I want it pixel perfect. But when you're getting to that breakpoint at 1025, or that breakpoint right there at 760, is it going to look exactly like the PSD? Of course, it's not going to. It helps your clients to see what that transition looks like, and really set that expectation that it's not going to look exactly like that PSD that you have sitting in front of you you've approved. In browser design, I've been a fan of that for a long time, and I love being able to get in and get that prototyping and seeing how things work and things don't work sometimes. And I think it's pretty easy to update and remove parts, and that file, that really granular modular file structure, you know, once you learn it, I think it's very powerful. And as I said, sometimes you're now working up in another level of files, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, I just need to change this, and well, oh no, I need to go change that back up in the very core files, the global files. And you end up, I think, also making less components overall, because you are making a single component, and then you are creating different variations of it, versus I have this component now, I've got another one I need to make up here. So, but once again, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, and I kind of want to go back to this whole concept of patterns. So what is a pattern? in kind of what we do. It's something that we are able to give a name. It's something that helps us solve a problem, whether it's displaying a product or displaying, putting a context around something. It's reusable. We can then use it, like this term here, or we can use it here. And we can then combine them and build other larger components. So hey, this is an idea of a component and or a pattern. And it, when you sit there and think about it, like, oh, is this an image? Well, yeah, of course it's a pattern. It just consists of this element called an image. We can reuse it all over the place. Some places we can put an anchor tag around it and make it clickable. Some places it's just an image. We can combine it with other things and then add on and it becomes something else. And of course, that's Bitsy making her grand appearance. She follows me in the office every day. And another example of a different pattern that you see all the way through our websites, headings. It's a very, very, very simple pattern. And it consists of our H1 tags all the way down through our H6 tags. Of course, we reuse it all over the place. It's got semantic meaning for different contexts on the page, which of course you want to use correctly so that you get all the benefits of that. You combine it with other patterns once again. What happens when I have an image and a heading? What else can we add to these patterns? Let's find some other things that we call patterns. How a paragraph. So once again, that's a super simple pattern. It's just text. We can reuse that, across all the common typography. And we'll, of course, combine that. You kind of see where I'm going with this. We're building on, we're building on. Let's think of something like a date. We may have different ways we want to display that date throughout the site. Sometimes we want to standardize it. And we can reuse that and combine it and do all sorts of different things with our dates. Now we start to think about, what about an info box or a card? Someone might call it a card, someone might call it an info box. It really is what makes the most difference to you. Super simple pattern again. But now what are we doing? We're displaying that teaser content to help drill the user down to other content. And, so a frequent thing we might see is, of course, you're seeing that image, you're seeing that heading, you're seeing that date, you're seeing that paragraph. And we're combining all these smaller patterns into this slightly larger pattern. And then we're going to see it more. What if we put it into a grid? We now have multiples of a single component, and this is, we might have other things like a hero banner where you use an image and maybe an H1 tag or a H2 tag and maybe some call to action buttons. Maybe it's an article or a blog list, and once again, you're combining these smaller patterns into these larger patterns. So how are we going to manage all these patterns? We have all these patterns that we deal with all the way across our websites. Well, we can always create a component library. And let's see, what have we got out there that we can do that with? And as I said, in my notes I have, and here's the logo soup that we go into for things the tools that we can use as front-end developers or designers to help manage these patterns. Now, KSSNode is a popular one. PatternLab seems to be an extraordinarily popular one. And of course, with either of those, you need some sort of task runner like Yeoman or Grunt or Bower or Gulp or some sort of compiled CSS like Sass or less.
It seems like you can just use like straight up CSS.
You could if you're not using, I think, the PatternLab tool or the KSSNode tool. But yeah, if you have always built websites like this is probably not new. You've always put your things very granular into different folder structures. This is actually the next thing where it's a tool that can help you manage this and create the style guide for you. So if you, let's say you add a new pattern, it's now automatically into your style guide. And it's because it's controlled by the code. So these are just a couple of the tools. But yeah, of course, you could use CSS. Here's the one that we have gone with. It's Pattern Lab, and it seems to be a really extraordinarily popular one out there. Once again, it's a Brad Frost tool from, I think it was originally created in like Mustache or something like that, and now it was adapted for Twig, which is one of the reasons why it kind of flows seamlessly with Drupal 8. There's been a lot of work by a lot of larger shops that have great themes that are starting to be built with these things, and I do have those all as resources and if you'd like to look into them. But this is, it helps you break down those common patterns, into these components that you can then reuse them all throughout the site. And they use terms like atoms and molecules and organisms and templates and pages. Do you have to do that? No, you don't have to do that. If it makes more sense for you to call it an element or a block or something like that, then sure, go in and you can change your file structure so that it reflects that. We've elected to kind of stay with this terminology because, one, it's already like that, and two, it starts to really make sense. At one point in time, I was like, what? Atoms, molecules? I don't get this. And then when you're really sitting there thinking about how everything works together, you're like, oh, that really does work, doesn't it? Okay. Of course, then you can have endless debates on what actually is an organism and what actually is a module or, a molecule. So it's definitely a learning process.
So is it an elaboration on card idea, the concept of a card?
Well, a card is a mixture of different little patterns. So you have an image possible. So a traditional card is a teaser. So you've got an image. It's usually maybe an H3 headline. Sometimes you'll have a date. Sometimes you'll have a byline. Sometimes you'll have a taxonomy term that helps organize and tell the user what that card takes them to. And then maybe a little bit of a teaser text. But it's taking those smaller patterns and then moving them up into that larger pattern. So yes, it is all about that. And you'll see here, this is when we start looking at actual pattern lab. So remember we talked about what those patterns were. We had that image. Now, I think I did use the same terminology as the Pattern Lab website because this is really a great way to think about it. So you've got your text, and then you maybe have a form input, and then you have buttons. Each one of those is an atom. It's a pattern unto itself. It could be site search. It could be a label, which is under your text. It could be a text area. It could be a text field. A regular submit button. It could be a secondary submit button because, it's a different color for whatever reason. And that kind of lives in our atoms area. And how does that combine? So now you start to see what a molecule might look like. So you see, okay, so we've taken that text and we've put it together with this input and we've put a button with it, and now we've got a molecule called search. And then we can repeat that search throughout the site, and it's always going to look the same. Or if it needs to look different, it can. We just make a variation of it. So, and then, what do we get up to an organism? So, like a site header would be an organism. So we've taken that molecule that we just created of search, and we've added it to a molecule that could be called main navigation, or menu, and logo, possibly. So it's really how you organize the site. But this would be an example of an organism. And then we go into our templates. Okay, so I'm not saying that these are all the templates. You may have less templates. You may have more templates. But you have these templates set up for maybe your home page, maybe what a section landing page looks like. And you then pull the different organisms up to that template, blog or a basic page, which is, we're used to dealing with those. And we create this template inside Pattern Lab. And then what is a page? Really, we're just adding content to it at that stage of the game. We're giving it the actual imagery so that now our clients can go and approve the designs that we have laid out for them.
Yeah, I like this, but I thought we can get something different. But how does it differentiate from a block?
Oh, okay. So the question was that, how does this differentiate from, let's say, a block? It really doesn't. It's not different than a block. What you then do is in Drupal and blocks, you would then go use that pattern. You might be able to, I haven't done a ton with hooking it up to Drupal, but let's say a block, our traditional is the content inside the block and then the title of the block, correct? So your pattern would be, or your atom would be your title, and maybe that's an H2. Maybe you need to change it for that particular block in H3. And you would then use that block and say, hey, I want this block to look like a card, go over and use the template for cards. Is that kind of right?
Yeah. When you say block, you mean a Drupal block?
Yeah.
Like here, this cards will start out, could be a block, could be a paragraph, could be no. It's not related to. It can be the same. You can use the same pattern for block and also for a paragraph.
Yep.
At the same time.
Yes.
Separating these two things in the patterns. One then first and then how
Well, I
we
mean,
do
is this for like all kinds of websites, not just the Drupal site? This
yeah.
Atomic design can be used, yeah, for anything and everything. It's just really a way of organizing your site and thinking of your site in reusable contexts, you know, in components. So that it can be reused no matter what the page is. And so let's say your client comes to you and say, hey, I want to add this type of page. Well, you've already got all these building blocks over here in your style guide. You pull the pieces out and only create the one or two new ones that you need to complete that project for them. So, sliced Diptopia, exactly.
Right, it slices Diptopia apart because you're literally defining what each component of your site is prior to creating the component. And so instead of trying to customize this component on this page on this content type, like, no, here's the overall style. Let's use it. It looks better this way. See? And then they agree and then you move forward.
Exactly. I would say, do I need to to repeat that? But go over here and talk mine. So getting into the flow of things. So, you know, it was interesting because I really want to talk about how I see it kind of already improving my workflow. So I wasn't quite sure how to talk about it, though. That was the interesting thing. So I kind of took a sample workflow. Now, obviously, every project of different sizes, it's never linear. It never quite looks like this. I get it. I know. You go back here, you go over here, you go back over here. It's based on all sorts of reasoning. But one of the things I found the most interesting about it is the particular project that we're working on right now, we were a little bit behind because of client deadlines and stuff like that. And because we're doing it, we opted to go to Drupal 8 and go with PatternLab as the design tool. It allowed me to start theming during visual design. So I'm now, you know, we got the site up, we've got it spun up. The devs haven't even been allocated for the back end or the site building portion. And here I am already in a site that's up and running and I'm doing theming in it. Now I'm just doing basic theming in it. And you know, it also kind of helps because your resources may be different. I was freed up, I'm a designer. I may or may not know Twig, but I sure as heck know CSS and Sass, and I know HTML. And so I can build these components, and then my back end or my themer person, once they're allocated, can then come in and say, okay, let's Twigify this. And we then have the reusable pieces, and then they can also start shooting Drupal over to look at those patterns and those templates that are over on PatternLab and start pulling them over to Drupal. So that's where I see it kind of really improving that workflow, is it moves that theming piece up in the visual design and gets the ball rolling a lot faster. And your clients are also able, one of the things I'm seeing with the clients that we're working with is that they see these components and these pieces, and it's putting that in front of them faster. And they're seeing it come together faster. And so they're like, oh yeah, of course, that's exactly what we do. Or they say something kind of abstract right there. Oh, wouldn't it be great if we see this in red? Okay, literally in the client meeting, turn it to red. Oh, no, that doesn't work. I didn't spend an entire design cycle in order to turn something red for them and then have them not like it in the first place. So that's how I see it kind of improving that, at least my workflow. And I think I've already covered this slide. You know, once again, it gets me in there prototyping faster. It reduces that timeline for the feedback. We can almost do some of it right there in a client meeting. Don't always recommend that, but it can. And as I said, it improves that resource efficiency. You know, as I said, almost everybody in the shop possibly knows CSS, HTML, and they can, you know, if they're allocated on that project, can get moving on PatternLab. And then the heavy lifting is we've got some time to implement that. Okay, come on. I didn't go too far, did I? It looks like I did. Yay, everyone loves it. Well, at least so far. As I said, I'm still in the honeymoon stage right now. And I think the reason why I like it as a designer is I really feel like I have this kind of refined control over the design. You know, as I said, now a lot of the developers I've worked with, they know me so well that they know what I'm going to kick back to them. So, you know, but being able to hand it off to them without even having that question and not having to spend 2 pages of documentation to write out, well, I want it to do this, and I want it to do this, and I want it to do this. It's there, they can see it. That's one of the things I love about it. And there's just no ambiguity. And I'm the worst person about documentation. So, you know, do I want to write 2 pages up on specs so that the developer can actually comprehend what I'm asking of them? And, you know, from a developer standpoint, you know, because I kind of live in that world a little bit, is I love the fact that it's completely modular. That if I see something that's wrong with it, I know exactly where to go for it in the code base. I don't have to search for it. I don't have to go through 3,000 lines of SAS that someone has in this big overflow. It is within, if it's a heading, it's in the heading folder structure, and it is in the heading SAS. Period. That's where it is. You know, and the fact that it eliminates that pixel perfect, we already know that things are going to slide a little bit, you know. And, you know, the fact that you have less components. If I'm not having to redo something 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times, and I just say, okay, this is a variation of this something I already built, that's a win for me. Less work, yay. And as I said, the clients seem to have received it really, really well. You know, they feel more involved. You know, you're pulling up the site and, you know, here we are just a week into design and we're already showing them what these will look like. And they're like, yeah, this is awesome. And as I said, that simple to understand layout, and it's kind of brings their project alive. It's not theoretical anymore. So let's see, what do project deliverables maybe look like? You know, from that PSD to that quote unquote living style guide. As I said, you know, we probably always delivered style guides, but you know, to have it actually living and breathing and changing as the site changes. And are PSDs dead? Of course not. They'll never be dead. Or whatever the variation is, sketch, whatever you love to work in. You know, I obviously I still envision myself using them for things like mood boards, and you know, there's always going to be clients that you need to get that initial benchmark set of what a page might look like. You know, of course we're going to use those. So, you know, I don't advocate completely going away from PSDs for all things. But if your client understands it and you can move that direction into more browser, into browser design, I think it is beneficial. As I said, the real win here is that living style guide. And so this is kind of a little bit of a snippet of, and I'll try, we're probably gonna have time, right? Because I talk way too fast. So, you know, like this is the base of the style guide. So kind of our global variables. And of course, we always do this for every project. You know, you go in, you declare your color structure, you declare what your H1s look like, and a sample of what the particular project I'm on, what that folder structure looks like. So you can see I've got, maybe not so well, but I've got this base thing. You've got your mixins in there. These are things that are used globally throughout the site, and it's all in this one particular folder file. And that's exactly what it looks like. You get a bunch of swatches. The client can see it in whatever computer they're looking on. You know, is the color working for them? Is the size of the headline working for them? Is the leading of the, you know, the kerning working for them? And I'm going to go into a little bit about what an atom. So you see how we move the place where I got this theme, which might be recognizable to some. They do a great job of, you know, an O1 for those atoms to get them, make sure they stay up front. And then we, let's see, I've got images, I think, since it kind of flows through. I've got an MD file in there, a README file in there that then prints these special cues for the client. So now I'm delivering, not only that, I'm delivering, hey, I recommend you put an 800 by 800 image in here. And, you know, some places we're going to control that with a CMS. Some places, you know, we still recommend, you know, controlling it by uploading. And then the twig that's available. So you can see that I got this div class of an image, and if there's a variation on it, so the variation could be this square or rectangular, or it could be whatever, and it'll then print that class in there for me. If there's a link, I think that's what it's in there as well. If the link is, if there's a link that's defined, now wrap the entire image with the link, and it lives all in that one file structure. And then once again, we go into the example of the molecules. You step down one more file folder into, what am I calling, an info box. So you see, you know, if I've got attributes on that, what are the attributes? And this is where we're starting to add the Drupal, where the classes are. I got, and add this and an NDIF on it. We're going to include, you see I look up to the image twig file and I say include that, and here are the variables that we want to pass into that. And I should probably, let's see, what have we got? Sorry, I've lost it here. Okay, there we go. Yep, so an example of and moving up one more again into organisms. So now you see how the info grid box went from a single to a triple grid. So we've now got the images and the tags and the title, and then the call to action. And where does that live in the structure of our site now? So it lives up under organisms, and I think it's called info box grid. You know, I could try to take a look at a real example, and let's see if I manage to mess this up, because we know how demos work always so well. So you've kind of seen this. We've got browser synced on it. We've got all the task runners. Let's see, we've got an icon thing. We've got all sorts of coolness going on. So you can see how the client can then sit here and play and go, oh, okay, so here's what a fade would look like. We'll roll down a little bit. Here's what our H1s look like. And let me go to, let's see what it would look like in medium. Come on. And it'll swap for me, and you can see how the leading changes and the size of the changes. And remember that area where I was talking about where you can actually see what the twig looks like. You get all your, so we have the title, and if there's a title, use this particular piece of code.
Can you zoom it in? Can you zoom it in?
I bet I can. Let me see.
Usually command flash.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. Let me also, on top of this, go back to full. And so you can kind of, so inside PatternLab, this is kind of this is the deliverable right here. So inside PatternLab, we've got, we're explaining what is the H1. So we've got this H1 tag. And you see where I've written the twig, and then this is what the output of the HTML is. And so these are all the things that we can use, all of our notes to ourselves. And if we've got a title, print this H1. If there's a variation, add that variation, and then go ahead and end that, and then print whatever the heading is. So, and then your variation on that. Where is it? There it is. So you can see that heading one front is a variation on that above one, and you can see how it then outputs heading one and then front. And let's just see, so we can roll through. Let's go back over here to we had all these atoms. So here's the atoms that we've declared in this project. So we have all sorts of text. And then we go and what are other things that like, what is it? An ordered list, a definition list, an ordered list, an unordered list. Remember how I talked about all those different images? So we've got a favicon, we've got a hero on the front because it's a different size. But it's just a variation of a hero. All the different icons, logos, forms was a lot of fun. So let me see if I can go into forms. So, it doesn't look like, of course this is Drupal 8, but all the fun with forms. So we've now got this beautiful form that kind of works a lot like material design forms, and when they then they'll then pull these styles over to Drupal, and they've actually hooked this piece up. I wish I could show it though, I don't have it. It inherits these pretty, stylings on your forms. Of course, I do love how I was said, how's that going to work in IE? I guess I'm going to find out now, aren't I? I know that when I looked at it before, it worked okay. I think you didn't get the nice heavy line, but I can live with that. I'm a developer. I can live with it not being 100% in IE. I want people to move away from IE. What can I say? And let's go back to that info box again, because we've played with this info box. You see how we've got an animation on our clickable image. Our titles are clickable, our CTA box is clickable. And then if we move up into organisms, we can then repeat that. So this is, and so the client has already seen this part. It's part of our news section for this particular website. And they're happy with how it I probably need to back out a little bit. Or not, okay, to see how it behaves when you go into small. So you can see how the title behaves, how the image behaves. Might need to do a little tweaking there. You know how that goes. Okay, and let's see what else do I have. Resources. This is my favorite part. So we have tons of resources. I didn't put all of them up here, but some of the ones that I have lived by, obviously, is the Pattern Lab. You have to have components, the components V8 installed in order to leverage this. I didn't go into a lot of technical detail. Obviously, you could do an entire second session on just how to put these things together. Which is one of the things that I would recommend is the component-based theming. It's a 4-part series by Evan over there at Four Kitchens. So it's got a lot of great information on how to take a deeper dive into this type of site build, taking the chunky town, and who out there has these already as V8 themes. The Emulsify theme, which is put out by the Four Kitchens guys. We have, I believe, Pattern Lab is I don't know if it's maintained, but it was sponsored by the Phase 2 people. And there's Gesso that is out there, I think, with 4-on-1. We are actually using the Emulsify one, which was actually Fork at the time. So it's got a lot of really great tools. It's got a great bulk build that's already included in it. So well thought out. And wish I had time to do it, but hey, they've already done a great job for us. So I got to give those guys a shout out. They, they're helping everyone level the game up. So, and questions? Thank you for bearing with me.
Brad Frost's book came out this month, or last month.
Oh, did it?
Atomic Design is fully published.
Fully published.
Yeah.
There's been so much on it. I mean, I remember coming across it 3 or 4 years ago, and just thinking, wow, this would be just, I would say, life-changing in order to think about websites like this. And this is this particular build, or this design build that I'm on right now, is the first time we've had the opportunity to actually delve in, because it is D8, it is, it allows, I mean, it's not that you can't use this with D7, obviously, but it doesn't link up like it does with D8. I mean, you can, of course, use PatternLab, you can use all the tools, but it doesn't have that automatic go in there and grab those things and bring it back over to Drupal and use it. And like he said, that div, you call it divtopia?
Divtopia. Divtopia.
You know, instead of having the divs that are 15 deep in order to find that one thing, it literally uses the twig, and you get the very streamlined HTML that you have planned for that particular component. So divtopia is at least minimized. I don't say it's completely gone, but you know, D8 has done away with a lot of it anyway. So, but it's fun and exciting to get to actually implement something that has been kicking around theoretically for what, 3 or 4 DrupalCons, and you know, and the people that have been out there on the cutting edge of it and advocating for it, and now becoming a reality for more of the masses.
How do you organize text styles? I saw that you have headings, but for me, I think starting with that, because sometimes you want to use the same style, and it's not a heading, it's a label, and it's sometimes time for me to name.
So what I've been doing so far is a variation on it. I don't, you know, like you saw, I had a heading, and then a heading front, and a heading this, but I don't know, should I, maybe I'll try to go back up into this. Yeah, text was a little interesting because there are so many things you can do, and there's of course inline, and where is my text section? The text. You see, look, there's a ridiculous amount of text stuff. So I haven't gotten any deeper than, or haven't needed to get any deeper than this. So I have, you know, obviously I've got the standard H1 like you would have pulled as a title, but then I needed this H1 for the front page that was different, because you know, my H1 is on my hero banner, and it needed to be bigger, and so I just did a variation on it, which then spit out, you know, that, as I said, if it's a heading 1 and I have a variation that's declared on it, then go ahead and use this variation.
And let's say for you want to use text style that is already that exists, or something else.
And you know, you're right, I don't have a label specifically for like a text form.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I should create a form label pattern or use a text style. Create that as a text style pattern.
Good question. You know, as I said, I haven't done. I did it as well, no, the forms, and they implement the dev implemented it pretty seamlessly. So when I did forms, let's see. So you see, I've got this text form. That's actually the label right there that I'm using as the placeholder text. I'm not actually using placeholder text in that case. And so the label's there, and you're right, I'm styling it slightly different because it's a label on the form, and I'm outputting, where is my, are you able to see all this? So it's pretty complex in there, because I've got a highlight span, and I've got a bar span, and enable, and then of course the SAS then tells it, you know, when the label's here, move it up to here so that I don't lose the label for the user from a user experience perspective. So that's kind of, and I wrapped, of course, the whole thing in it, because you know, with all that position changing, then you need to control that. But, you know, so that's, you know, you're right. It's not. I don't use it as a text field there. I use it as a label to a form versus, but you know, it could, according to Atomic Design, and you saw there, that was a text atom. So it's kind of whatever works for your build, I guess. You know, as I said, I was having fun. I was having fun. So,
So Pattern Lab, it talks about when we look at the site when we were talking, it says it has memory. But the output is a static site, right? That you can sit down and you can find, you can go over basic styles. But you're not really mocking up the application. Right?
Drupal kind of sits in there next to it, if I remember. As I said, I didn't quite cover all that cool stuff, that hotness.
Help showcase a little better.
I don't know that I've got tons of pages in here. This is absolutely. If you've done this,
Well, this was actually one of the things I wanted to mention is that Pattern Lab is like its own site. So it no longer relies on Drupal. It could actually be a WordPress backend. It could be any backend. And one of the keys here is that you have the YAML files, which are the example data. And so it's completely separated. It's kind of like taking the headless concept to the next level because it's a separate site and you don't need the backend anymore. So designers can do their stuff and I don't have to rely on that at all.
and it actually does reside in a completely, I mean, it resides in a different area in those themes. And it outputs to like a public folder and has a dist folder. And
Can you show how to turn it on?
I'm trying to think of,
Have some stuff on the command line.
I've got way too much insanity going on in the command line here. It's on, and let me get to,
That was kind of helpful to me too, as you just said, because that's what I thought.
Yeah.
There's, wanted to have this concept of being irrelevant to whatever you're doing that. Yes, right.
so let me, this actual site that I'm actually playing in, let's see if I can,
You can have a longer review.
so when you start to get into, this is this is the theme. So we've got the components, and then where's the Drupal? So here's the Pattern Lab part, and here's the Drupal part. So you recognize the Drupal. And the Pattern Lab lives up here in components and actually outputs to this specific public folder here. So you're right, it's completely, divorced of that. So you see this public folder, that is actually what it turns out to be your Pattern Lab right here. But yet, in order for it to be used, see this dist folder, the gulp file or the gulp that is in this theme outputs all the SAS that is in the components and the patterns up to this dist folder so it can be used by both Drupal and the Pattern Lab site. Makes sense. Am I confusing things? This is where the non-technical Caryn comes in.
And I also assume that you run this on some kind of responsive framework like Bootstrap.
You could use Bootstrap. You could use. I've actually started going with the skinnier stuff like Singularity. One because it was in. It was part of the Emulsify build too. That's already in there, and so you just need to familiarize yourself with how Singularity works. But I also like it because it doesn't have all that heavy stuff that Foundations or Bootstrap has. So you got your grid framework. You can do pretty much anything you want to with it.
I know you were doing grids. Yeah, responsive framework.
Well, it's using the Singularity. I mean, I'm telling it to sit on, a 12 grid and push in so many, you take up this many, at this width, go ahead and you take up 3 pieces on the grid, and if not, you take up, 12.
So in its TED talk, I believe it was Brad Frost actually referred to it as mini bootstraps. And so each pattern lab that you create is a new bootstrap that exists, or each whether you use Pattern Lab or you use a different atomic design toolkit like the KSSNode, each one you create is a mini bootstrap that only exists for that client that you created it for. But when you turn it on at the beginning, when you're starting, you have all of your let's say base parts, your H1s, your H2s, your forms, basically everything you saw on that Atoms screen, all of your base parts, and then you have a handful of your put together parts, a handful of your template type areas where a search form footer, a header, and so on. And so as you are editing each of those, you're building your mini bootstrap right there in the prototyping phase. And so right after you finish the prototyping phase, and like she said, once you showcase it to the client and they say, no, make this red, you made that red, your prototype is actually, I would say, what, 90, 95% ready at that point. And if you
I see
decide
another
you don't
advantage to
need
that is just you know what code is driving the design. Whereas with Bootstrap, you sometimes
You gotta go find it.
it.
Especially when you don't want it. It's like, okay, where is this and how do I get out of here?
stop floating that off the screen.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah,
Another thing I found is that sometimes what I like about one of the things I like about thinking in components instead of pages is that you will get these isolated components, and if you want to remove one, that shouldn't affect other stuff. But sometimes it's difficult because if you are using flexbox, you have your grid component that's going to have the parent properties like flex, display flex, but then you need the children to have flex row or flex, and it's no longer possible to really separate these.
yeah.
Have you run into this issue?
I haven't run into it yet, but the build that we're doing is actually pretty simple. So I'm not, I don't even know if I'm using Flexbox on like that info grid piece yet. I think the cards might use it, so I'll see it more when I get a little further into it. As I said, this is pretty new, what you're seeing. As I said, still magic, but as I said, I'm surprised how well it's coming together so quickly. And as I said, the things that I found that were difficult for me was, so I've built all my atoms. Okay, and I think I built all my atoms. And then I start to build one of my organisms, and I'm going, oh, shoot, I need another atom over here. And now I make a variation on that atom so that I have the right thing that I need here. And it's that back, it was a little bit something to get used to that back and forth, because of course, what's my natural reaction? I want to go, just change it right here because I'm here already. But I need to go back and do it in the right place, because if I don't, then I'm not setting up whoever takes over the site maintenance from me. I don't set them up for success. So, as I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, well, let me go back over to the atoms and I'll go put that in, and then I'll be able to pull the right thing that I want, the way I want it. So that was part of the learning curve. It's like this constant back and forth, because you think you have it all and you realize you don't. You don't realize how many little atoms you use on your site, I guess. You saw the list, it just keeps growing. But yet you don't want to use too many different variations, It's one of the things that always drive me crazy is I'd hand off all these PSDs and I'd miss whatever. I've gone through and someone wanted the point size a little bit larger on something, and I've done all of them and I missed one. And then, being the good dev that they are, they did that one in the right size, exactly how the PSD was. And it was like, oh man, I really wanted it the same size as the rest of them. Okay, that's on me, because guess what? I didn't change all the PSDs. Now, some of them will, some guys, some devs would come back to me and say, hey, did you really mean this one to be a 20 and not a 22 like everything else? Or just go ahead and override it. But then you have the ones that literally do it to the letter, exactly how the PSD is. It's like, no, that's not what I meant, but okay, cool, you did the right thing. Can we do it this way now?
I noticed here CSS naming has a convention here that I think this kind of leans towards.
Is them? Yeah, I've been trying very hard to make myself adopt the them structure.
The what structure?
It's what is it? Element modifier, block
element modifier.
Yeah, block element modifier, which is, and using so your block, and then you set it with 2 underscores for your element, and then 2 hyphens for the modifier on it is the structure. So, And some of the classes in the original, like I think heading 1 came from Emulsify, and I was like, ooh, I really love it if it was, So I got my BEM in there, following it up. But as I said, I've been trying really hard to make sure I always name things that way as well. Even back as to the as crazy as it was as I was naming all my colors, going, man, my color names are getting so long. But really to set that convention up. Let's see. Come on. You can see that color primary dark, color primary color accent. So I felt like I was getting a little on the you call it. But as I said, it really sets people up for it's a color. Now when I'm going through in whatever coding thing, I just hit color and then I can scroll through and select the one I want. So if they're all named by the block first. Anything else? You can see the people that have been working with it.
I was just curious, as a designer, when you seek to design a new component or page or thing, do you look at this? What's your process?
Do I look at this?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, I always try to go find something I've already done once, and if it can be very great, if it can't, then I do something new. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Would you create a new PSD for that, or skip that and directly?
It depends on. For me, it depends on the client. I'd try to skip it and go straight to this and just say, hey, here's a new thing. But it depends on. Right now I'm working right off the wireframes for this. Actually, most of it. I've got that one PSD, and then the rest of the things are wireframes. So I already know kind of what all the components look like, and that's what I've been working off is the wireframes. So I didn't actually go back into PSD for that. And if we were to add another page or something else, as the designer on the project, of course, I'm going to go try and reuse everything, and I've been so knee deep in it. Now, if I inherited a project like this, obviously the first thing I want to do is go and familiarize myself with what components are there and then reuse as many as possible before I go off into create new land.
Also, one of the things I wanted to mention was that now that your designers are not working like in Drupal anymore, that presents you with an interesting kind of challenge that you think about now. And that's what is the theming layer used for within Drupal 8, because it's still there. It still has a purpose. But now it's kind of building the contract like between the front end and the back end. So if you have your YAML files as the example data that's passed back and forth, then that's what the theming layer's purpose is to communicate between the back end, Drupal, and the front end, PatternLab.
You presented it already?
Well, so I kind of thought about it like you're building like an API contract between the two apps, and so that's where your theming layer comes in. What do you think about that, maybe?
That's another talk. Maybe that's January's talk.
And so that's where I think something like Emulsify would come in helpful, because it gives you that example code as to how to connect the two. Like how do you actually make it work now?
Well, I've got a little project that I'm starting that does a completely that's beautiful, and it's using a totally different background than HP MySQL. So I'm going to play with this and just see what we're talking about. But the handoff is really where you're concerned. Like YAML files, and I'm sure some JavaScript is going to be involved too, right?
Well, so the JavaScript lives within the components, but now you have to build. It's actually, I think, going to be like a mix of twig and PHP, and changing your variables delivered. You now have to get like views to talk to this, and so like each row on the view is going to be like a different part that you have to pass off, and so it just presents some really interesting challenges. I got to mess around with it a little bit. I'm just going to have to refer to example code.
This project will not be used. I know it's heresy, but well,
It will not use views.
So it doesn't really want to.
So if you're using, forgive me, I'm just trying to visualize where this fits in. So if you're doing a headless Drupal app where the front end is written in, React.js or even React Native or Ember or something like that, could you still use this, or does this require? Does this have like an adapter technology or plugin that, depending on your front end implementation stack, you can still use this, or is this really tied to a particular, set of front end
It's
tools?
not tied. So like your YAML files, if you think about that as like your contract, that's what you say your PatternLab file is like always going to take. You're always expecting to receive this information, and you can have anything delivered. So it's just getting the two to talk together to by the same.
But you're talking about talk to the back end, right? You say getting them to talk to each other and what people are expecting.
Well, so this is the front end.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is if you have a different
Again,
Like- front end,
driver, yeah.
that like, React or Ember or whatever, and they have their own set of requirements. I'm just wondering, is there, because I'm trying to learn that too, and it's a whole different ballgame for me, and they talk about, because that's what, when Facebook created React, it's like component-based, hierarchical component-based design rather than separation of concerns with, CSS here and separate files and your queries over here and that over there, that they're kind of saying they're going to wrap it all into this component where all three of them sit together. It just seems like if you're going that way, this is not your solution. That's what I'm
It'd be a
hearing.
replacement for this.
That's what I'm hearing.
John, you were referring to the new stack as opposed to the
Yeah, but
sounds like.
it doesn't require, Node or anything on the back end. It's, a React front end is just,
So it's using like React.js instead of Foundation.js. I haven't played with React.
yeah, well, I'm just doing the
I mean, no matter
tutorials
what,
right now.
no matter what, how you build a website, the only thing that anybody at BB Browser cares about is HTML, and JavaScript, regular JavaScript, and CSS.
Yep.
Right. And so all of these things are just tools on how do you make delivering that to the browser easier and more maintainable. And so doing stuff with components and patterns is a philosophy on design, not a philosophy on technology.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to get at.
So component design is like the philosophy. PatternLab is the technology for how to do philosophy in a specific way. And PatternLab, specifically for Drupal, uses like twig templates, but you could also use Mustache, which are JavaScript templates. But if your front-end thing like React doesn't use templates, then this probably wouldn't be very useful because this uses templates a lot.
Okay. The JSX is what the
So the only way I could see them playing together is when if you use the this folder and refer to, you use Pattern Lab maybe kind of standalone to get your buy off and your client buy off on your designs, and then you've got your folder of all your classes that you've now created there, and your templates, I guess, are coming from React, and they're just calling those same classes.
Right. But if component-based design is built into React, that's just how you do things, then there's really no need for an extra tool because it's built in. For us in Drupal, it's not built in.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'll help.
I was playing with it for 2 months before I realized that Pattern Lab and Kanopi design were two very different things.
Okay.
Pattern Lab is a
It's
tool
the tool for it.
to facilitate. Atomic design has the S, as Brenda says.
there's a TED Talk about the atomic design.
Yeah, that's all good.
That's all, okay.
He was talking about Legos and Subway.
Subway sandwiches or?
Yeah.
Okay.
and So you got all your pieces, right? Each client has a different set of pieces. And the idea is that you have your pieces put together before you ever meet your client. And then when they tell you, okay, put pieces together in this way, you have a sandwich ready in minutes, as opposed to a competitor who is having to literally slice the bread, slice the meat, cut up the vegetable, whatever. You have everything ready. And then you just stack it together.
With your sample data in YAML files if you want to.
Right, well, so imagine you have an open source project like Emulsify that has a bunch of components ready to go. Now you just put the components together and you have the whole site.
So PatternLab here, it's not like a WYSIWYG tool. You just basically drag and have a properties pane on the side where you
have to write the twig.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get. Thank you. That's
You have
what.
to either write the
So you're
twig
authoring
or,
the twig yourself.
or or depending on the level of the person who is on the design part of this project, it could just be HTML. And then when it's passed off, it's then turned into twig because it needs to be twig at some point in time in its life cycle. But
Okay, so-
not everybody knows twig right now, but we're learning it.
The last hypothetical question, this will help. So could somebody come along, write a WYSIWYG authoring tool that actually supports this atomic-based design philosophy and PatternLab? You know what I mean? It could generate the twig and all this and that. I mean, usually, when you're used to doing what you're doing, and designers these days, right? You know all the CSS and the twig stuff more and more, right? So I guess I'm trying to understand the layering and the stack.
I think that's what
Do you remember like Dream?
That's what Drupal is.
Drupal is the WYSIWYG thing you're talking about, right? So you write, as a designer, you say, all right, here are my different components, my atoms, my molecules and stuff.
Right.
And then Drupal, you say, all right, I want a new content type, and it has these fields, and those fields are of the type of component. And so Drupal is going to connect this file field, well, that's a image component when you view it, right? And so when you then build your Drupal site, then what it outputs is your components from PatternLab. So it's a really heavy WYSIWYG.
A lot of overhead.
Not as much as before.
What is Drupal?
And that's probably why Dries is very interested in moving forward. This component-based design, even within Drupal. I think it's one of his most recent keynotes. Okay, I'm going to shut up.
There's been a lot of work on it
I'm too
in the
green.
last
Too many
several years.
That was a good question. Yes.
Yeah, we facilitated a great discussion.
Yeah.
Like 20 questions with frameworks. Does it do? If I took it.
Should we finally stop it?
I stopped the recording. I think I
I
did.
should've.
At least I hope I did.
Before I open my mouth.
Well, and who knows how well it's actually going to turn out. I turned it towards everybody.
And what was the name of that thing?
I don't know. I know nothing anymore. My brain is blank. The fact that I survive, I'm happy,
So when it does a standalone thing, like what does it use to generate the standalone HTML? Is it using like PHP or is it using like
Usually both.
Yeah, it's
Gulp. There's a twig parser in JavaScript now. So Gulp parses all your twig, and that's what spits out the PatternLab page.
Oh.
Yeah, so Emulsify has both.
which is one of the reasons why I kind of keyed into it, because me having to sit there and figure out all a Gulp build with all the cool hotness that's going on nowadays. And, yeah, there's so much in front end. It's just mind-boggling these days.
Sink or swim?
It really is.
Just the front end?
Just the front end. Yeah, well, exactly.
I
I do nothing but KSS. I had to look it up. What's KNYLP?
So we
That's,
have,
that's somebody's name, right? Right?
Yeah, I guess.
Is a,
It's the acronym KSS.
yeah.
Oh.
we had two of our top front-end guys debate
The merits of
whether
each one.
KSS or PatternLab, and PatternLab was in on the discussion. I don't really know what happened in the discussion, but Charles, I think, was also very pro PatternLab.
I've never heard anyone defending KSS over PatternLab. I've heard people
Media
using
current.
it, but then they say it's because it was working before PatternLab.
Huh? Yeah. Media current, I think, is the only one that I know of that's using KSSNode actively and as
No,
their,
there's people using it, but
yeah.
what I've heard these people say is that they haven't tried PatternLab. They are happy with KSSNode, and that's why they stick with it. But not because it's better necessarily.
It's funny because
It's the difference, I think, between gulp and grunt. You
Yeah.
know, you like one or you like the
Yeah,
other. I mean, I
it
used,
works.
yeah, I got used to grunt on one, and once I used gulp, it seemed a little simpler to me, and it was like, okay, well, then we'll do it this way.
I keep getting told that gulp is so much better, but I keep learning more grunt because that's what I use.
For me,
I don't
there's,
know.
yeah.
I just use what's ever installed on the side of I'm in support, so it's like, okay, whatever got installed, that's what I have to work with.
NPM use what, or NVM use what?
I've come to recognize that errors that it spits out when I'm using the wrong version of something.
That's what I love the messaging that was put in the emulsify theme. It's, you know, when you're doing your builds, it gives you these little like Easter eggs inside the, you know, like this is not the so-and-so you're looking for. You're just like, oh, those guys over
It told me
4K have
again.
such a freaking sense of humor.
Wow,
I had left it on too long, and then the thing was like, okay, you've been working way too hard, go to bed. It's like, why is my computer telling me this?
I was dying laughing. Each time, you know, you like do a start or something, you have to say everything come up for, you know, you got the Y, because it's got, what is it? It's got, doesn't it, I mean, it's got the sprite thing in there. It's got, of course, the refresh, and it's got a refresh on templates. It's got a refresh on, and I think it has the prefixer too, auto prefixer. I'm not quite sure where you don't have to remember all the different WebKit and you know the prefixes that go on the newest CSS for you. But you know you can watch it run through all of its commands, and all of a sudden one will come up with it. I see you doing something, and you're just like, okay, I wasn't watching. I really wasn't. I promise. Stop.
If you do start using this, you're gonna be a little freaked out with some of the messages. So definitely get your attention.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. I think it's a green something where they like eat people. Soylent Green or something like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
there was.
I think mentioned something like that.
Soylent Green is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one in there. I remember that one. You have to pay attention. It's like you have to pay attention to your build going now just to see which one comes up for you. It's usually not good.
I was playing with the field the other day at work in the distribution we have, and somebody had put in a field in the administrative notes, right? So the field's UI has to be on to even see the.
Yeah, I was finding it later where they've got a JavaScript alert on something. This does nothing. Why is this still here?
Many redirects, but we're a professional website, so we don't allow that.